All right, welcome to our Getting 15 Pounds Healthier in 15 Weeks workshop. And I'm excited about showing you this and sharing this information. This is not going to be just the usual stuff that gets thrown around over and over and over again. We're going to be talking about the best and most up-to-date, what the science tells us is the way people get results. And I'm going to share with you exactly what I'm doing with folks right here in the practice, so that they hit the goals that they have. And, this is a really important topic. And oftentimes people kind of minimize the importance of this, or they're maybe are a little embarrassed about being interested in this subject. Like, there's all different reasons why this subject oftentimes doesn't get hit head on. Well, tonight we're not going to be skirting around the edges. We're going to face this, and I'm going to lay it down exactly what is going on and what we can do about it, and what you can do at home about it as well. So I want to start out with just an example of how I work with folks here in the office. So I want to share with you the story of, let's see, here we go, of Donna. So Donna came into my practice and she had low back pain, and that was because she had a bum knee. So she was kind of had an altered gait, and she figured that was what was causing her back pain. And her friend, who was a farmer, said, "Oh, you've got low back pain. You need to go see Dr. Heather." So she comes in for that reason. But as we did our thorough consultation with her, we recognized that she also had a goal in the background of wanting to get a healthier body, and weight loss resistance was one of her concerns. So we just got to work, and with our thorough exam, we discovered what interferences she had in the nervous system, what was going on, and we gave her recommendations, and she followed all the recommendations. And at the end of a year, not only did her back feel better and her knee got better, but it meant she was able to start exercising. And one of her other concerns was high blood pressure. She was actually on medications for high blood pressure. And I want you to pay attention to that factor, because that is one of the other pieces to this whole picture of concerns around obesity and weight loss resistance, is that there are other things that are also going on in the metabolism that we need to also be paying attention to. Well, at the end of that year, because she had followed all of our recommendations, not only did her back get better and she was able to start exercising, but her blood pressure went down. She was able to get off of the medications. And in 1 year, she lost 60 pounds and 40 inches. So talk about transformation. And that wasn't even the first reason that she came in. But once she started to get healthier, then she started to see these results, and she was able to just keep going with it. So I want to punctuate that phrase I just used of getting healthier, because the topic of weight loss, it's a very touchy issue. And I've had people that, criticize me when I send out an email that I'm going to be doing a talk on how to get 15 pounds healthier in 15 weeks. And they're saying, you shouldn't be doing that, as if it's a shameful thing. And I want to just stress that I named this very specifically. It is not a workshop on weight loss. It is a workshop on how to get healthier. 15 pounds healthier might mean that you drop and lose 8 pounds of fat, but you gain 7 pounds of muscle. So your weight might not change at all, but that's a very healthy transformation in your body if that is something that you did accomplish in 15 weeks. And so there are lots of unhealthy ways that people are trying to deal with their weight and their bodies. And I want to just cut through all of that and go right to what are the healthiest ways to get the ideal body that anybody would want for themselves. And it is very individual. So I am here to support people to get to where they want to get to, but to do it in the healthiest way. Are you with me on that? Everybody with me? All right, thumbs up. All right. So first question I would have for anybody is, what is your objective? So Donna, she came in with low back pain, knee trouble, couldn't exercise, weight loss resistance, and high blood pressure. Her objective was to get healthier. And as a result, she got these results of a low back feeling better, knee feeling better, able to exercise, lost 60 pounds and 40 inches, and normalized her blood pressure. Those are the kinds of outcomes that I want to see people having. If she came to see me and said, I want to lose 60 pounds, I would still have to dig for, well, what is your objective? Why do you want to do that? Until we could get to the place where she would then tell me, oh, because I want to be healthier. I don't want to be carrying this weight around for, years to come. It's going to tank my health. So once we can get to that, then I know I'm the right person that can help somebody. But it is not my job, and I don't want that role of just helping people drop pounds no matter what, because it can result in some very unhealthy outcomes. So asking people, what is your objective? Is it simply to lose weight, or is it to avoid disease that comes with carrying too much weight for too long? Is it about increasing your strength or increasing your speed? Is it increasing your performance, your capacity, your function, right? Those are the questions that I want to be able to answer, because if your objective is to create optimal health, which would include getting that ideal body that you want, then what I'm going to share with you tonight is going to help you find the way there. All right. And so it is important that we measure things, and we measure objective things to know if we're staying right on course with our goals. And so I don't like to use standing on a scale and measuring your weight as the best way to be measuring that. I would rather be measuring your inches around your waist, for example, and your strength and your speed and other ways to measure function. I would much rather be measuring those things than just to be looking at the scale. So when we look at what things would be good to measure, oh, and by the way, if anybody that is watching this, whether it's the recording or live, I do want you to know that I know everybody's individualized with what their goals are and what their challenges are. So if anybody that is watching this, if you want to just have a conversation with me about your specifics, I'm happy to do that. All you need to do is just send a text to our phone number, 802-985-9850. And if you just put in the subject box of the text, 15 and 15 consult, then my team will know exactly how to get you onto my schedule. And I'm happy to do that. So keep that in mind as we proceed through our workshop here. So what is the best way to measure what is optimal health? Well, we definitely know that if we look at even just the simplest definition, my favorite definition of health is optimal cell function. It's 3 words, optimal cell function. That's it. And so if you can find a way to measure that, then we know that we can look at whether or not we're moving in the right direction towards it. So one of the ways that we can measure that is through looking at biomarkers. And that's a way to measure if function is actually improving. We can also just look at performance, all the ways that you would measure what your performance is. And then it actually is a measurement to know whether you feel like you have a healthy appearance. Like, I want to look good. I want to look good naked in front of the mirror with nothing covering up, like that's my definition of how I want to look. Maybe somebody has that for themselves. So looking good, but it's not just about looking good. It's also about feeling great and functioning better. And so I always want to default to what are the ways to measure function that is really going to tell us that we're on the right track to truly optimal health, which would mean optimal cell function. All right. And so we definitely want to measure things because we want to now look for something specific to change and then be able to measure it to know that we're right on track. Now, a lot of people may use very unhealthy ways to measure whether they're on track with their weight loss goals. And I do think there's a problem in our culture about the images that we use. And this idea of skinny being the new sexy, I'm really appalled by that as a message to any age, but especially to our youth. So I say we need to change that. And I would like to see it change to healthy is the new sexy. Healthy is the new sexy. Who's with me on that one? Give me a thumbs up if you're with me on that, right? Exactly. So otherwise, the message is so disempowering and it's so damaging to create anchors that are unhealthy like that, and especially in early on in the young. So we're going to just shift this to a new standard, which is that healthy is the new sexy. And it's so important that we do that because the brutal facts are that we have an obesity epidemic. And it is troubling, but it also tells us something because adiposity, which is another word for obesity, is largely caused by poor diet, inadequate physical activity, and a lot of the times there's an emphasis on the more downstream risk factors like hypertension, dyslipidemia, that's, your cholesterol concerns and the fats going sideways, and diabetes. But a lot of times these root causes of obesity are not actually being addressed, or the full cardiovascular consequences. So this is from a journal called Circulation. It's one of the hardest journals to get published in. So the fact that they are publishing this study and the comments they're making is really important. So really, the blood pressure concerns, the cholesterol, the blood sugar handling concerns, those are all so important. And when we look at other factors that are associated with obesity, we see that there's lots of evidence that shows that the same lifestyle factors that lead to the obesity would include exposure to chemical carcinogens, that same physical inactivity, the diet, and it leads to the development of common cancers as well. So when we look at the current human diet, the mutagens, the carcinogens that lead to cancer and chronic diseases are also part of the problem here. And when we have toxins in the body, one of the safest ways to try and store them is storing them in fat. And many times weight loss resistance may be linked to the fact that you've got so many toxins that the body doesn't want to have those toxins go into your bloodstream and into your other organs because it's trying to store it in the fat. So it doesn't want to release the fat because it's a safe place to hold the toxins. So toxicities are an important part to address if we're really going to get to the underlying causes of why some people may have weight loss resistance or challenges to getting the ideal body that they want. And so again, it's lifestyle choices we have to look at, and it's not just the cardiovascular, it's not just the cancer, it's the diabetes as well. So there's been a dramatic, like a hockey stick inflection point in the last 30 years with type 2 diabetes representing not only the most serious obesity related consequence, but we're seeing it in younger and younger ages. So type 2 diabetes used to be called adult onset diabetes, but now we're actually seeing it showing up in our kids. And nearly 90% of individuals with type 2 diabetes are overweight. So there's definitely a link with this as well. So when we look at obesity, there are these downstream conditions. It's not just about the idea of someone's body shape and what their level of self-esteem is around that. That is not the only thing we need to talk about here. We have to talk about the real consequences of holding on to that weight over time and how it is linked to the heart disease, diabetes, and cancer. And there's a clean and direct relationship. So I don't want to underemphasize the seriousness of this. And when we look at, even in the last 3 years, when we went through this whole COVID challenge to our system, that actually showed us a lot about the health of our population, because what we saw is that this article, COVID-19 and the elephant in the room, basically what it was saying is that obesity was the real killer behind COVID, that when COVID came into our population, who were the ones that were the most vulnerable? It was the people that were already unhealthy. And obesity was one of the main factors. And, the whole pandemic is not because of a novel virus. It's because of a novel virus traveling through a very unhealthy population. And the US got hit the hardest with it, compared to so many other countries. Now, there's another factor here that I want to, and a new word I want to bring up, which is sarcopenic obesity. So oftentimes we'll look at the BMI, the body mass index, which is tied to the waist circumference and how that relates to your overall weight. And when there is an unhealthy BMI, it's often linked to a prevalence of chronic metabolic disease. And that can affect people also that don't have the obesity, but they have what would be considered normal weight. And that's because there's something called sarcopenic obesity, which is oftentimes found in elderly patients. Now, you've heard of osteopenia, which is really, it's a description of bone loss. Sarcopenia is muscle loss. And it's not talked about very often because there's no drug that can fix it. So if there isn't a drug that can fix it, you're not going to see commercials about it on TV about the latest drug they just came out with that is, is tied to trying to address it. No, sarcopenic obesity is basically someone that looks like their normal weight, but they actually have the same metabolic dysfunction as an obese person does, for example, with diabetes. So it turns out that only 12% of American adults actually have a healthy metabolism, and less than a third of the normal weight people also are in this category. So we have to remember that just because somebody has what might be the appropriate weight, they still may not have a healthy body. And so for them, getting 15 pounds healthier, it might mean that they're building muscle in order to get healthier, and having more muscle versus fat, even if it's sarcopenic, which means it doesn't look like you're fat, but the muscle is wasted and then filled in with fat. That's another condition that can happen. We want this body to get healthier. And so having healthy muscle tissue will actually be one of the things that counteracts, that reconciles the metabolic dysfunction that people can have. So there's no such thing as a healthy weight. There's only a healthy person. I love that line. And so again, we have to be looking at sarcopenic obesity is basically a skinny fat person is the way we would describe it. And so again, just so key that we recognize that gaining 8 pounds of muscle and losing 7 pounds of fat, you would be the same weight, but you'd be a healthier person. All right. So the other piece that I think is important here is we just need a better way. And the time to promote health is not just when we're trying to avoid a virus. We should be learning the lessons from COVID-19 that COVID-19 moved through a very unhealthy population, and that we need to be now addressing that and spending our time, energy, focus, and money on building health in our population, getting everybody healthier and stronger. And that's going to come by looking at lifestyle choices and training people on how to have healthier lifestyle choices. So let's just be real about this. Let's call it what it is. Fat is sick. And this is a new and more accurate truth than trying to not address this issue or trying to normalize this idea of obesity. Obesity is the linchpin for the chronic diseases that are crippling our community. And so by normalizing obesity, we're actually undermining what we should be doing, which is getting everybody healthier. So let's just set the record straight on that and recognize that the obesity trends that we're seeing, how obesity is growing and growing, it tells us that what people are currently doing is not working. And so let's just make sure we understand that this has to be behavior-based. If you keep doing what you've been doing, you're going to keep getting what you've been getting. And so we have to just recognize that fat is a symptom. And even more accurately, we would say it's a sign, because a symptom is something you feel and a sign is something you can measure. And so it's a body signal. And if you don't get this concept that fat is a symptom of unhealthiness that needs to be addressed, then you don't have a chance of addressing it. And so we have to just get our head around this. So fat is a symptom of a chronic hormone imbalance. That is what the body is telling us, is that hormones have gone sideways in a chronic way. Adiposity, otherwise known as extra body fat, is a symptom of chronic hormone imbalance. Hormones and enzymes are what regulate fat storage. So you have to regain hormone balance through specific lifestyle changes and choices that directly impact the hormone balance if you ever want to conquer any kind of weight or health issues. Obesity is a hormonal problem. Behaviors matter. And it really comes down to this concept of whether you are in fat storage mode or fat burning mode. That is the key to this. So if we look at this idea of the perfect hormone storm, what are the factors that come together that cause our hormones to just go sideways? And these are the factors. We have the toxic deficient food choices that we're making. We have energy imbalances, such as having too sedentary of a life and having excessive calories. But then we add to that chronic social stress, lack of sleep, chronic exhaustion, and the result can only be weight loss resistance when you put all of these things together. That's what has to happen, because these are the laws of physics. This is natural law. This is what the body is going to do when you put all of these things together. These are the stresses, but these are playing out with other factors, and that is the key thing to understand. So let's dive into this. Let's unpack this, and let's look at, for example, inflammation and other factors that are playing out here. Weight loss resistance is very much tied to inflammation, and we can look at it as a three-legged stool. So we have to look at the microbiome in the gut as one leg of that stool, the DNA, what you're born with, what you've inherited from your ancestors, and then the present time or ongoing stressors that you're exposed to. And so it's the curse and the blessing, because identifying what these are, there is a blessing in here that we can change these things. But if we don't change them, we will be cursed by them. So when we look at the first one, the gut is so important. We need to make sure that we heal and seal the gut. The health of the gut is really key for determining what is going to happen in your metabolism. So we're going to unpack this in more detail as well. DNA is the blueprint, but it's not the brain of your cells. It's the blueprint. The membrane is the brain of your cells, because that's what directs how the DNA is going to express itself. And so we need to either upregulate or downregulate the genes that may be wreaking havoc and causing the weight loss resistance. And we do that through lifestyle. So we have to heal and seal the gut. We have to fix the cell membranes that may be inflamed and dysfunctional. And then we have to address the stress as well. So let's unpack each one of these things. First, let's look at healing and sealing the gut. Now, these two mice, they look very different. You might even think they were two different species of mice, but in fact, these two mice are actually genetically identical. They are clones of each other. They are genetically have the exact same DNA with no variability at all, exact same DNA. What is different is their gut microbiome. The bugs that they have in their gut are changing how the DNA is expressing itself. And so there's a specific, it's called the Methanobrevibacter smithii. That's the name of the particular microbe in the gut that is present in the obese mice that is not present in the normal sized mice. And it is very common in obesity in humans, and it actually causes somebody to crave the wrong foods and to trigger inflammation. So the bugs in your gut can actually influence your behavior, and they can actually make you crave foods that are unhealthy for you. So even if our brain is looking at that food and our brain knows we've been told it's not healthy, we know it's not healthy, we read a book on how unhealthy it is, but I still have to eat it. That kind of craving may be actually coming from the unhealthy gut flora that you have in your microbiome, making up your microbiome. And what they found was when they changed out the unhealthy gut flora, the obese mouse actually downregulated and then proceeded to a healthy normal size. So that's how impactful it is to make sure the gut is healthy. So one of the factors that is important that gets unnoticed is in healing the gut, one thing we need to identify is foods that contain lectins. Now, a lectin is bad because it's in the category of nightshades, like peppers and tomatoes and potatoes. Those are all nightshades. But it's also in beans, peanuts, cashews, and grains. And lectins are a compound that plants use to stop predators from eating them because it poisons the animal that eats them. And so if you were a plant and you did not want to be eaten so that you could live your whole life, sprout your seeds, and then grow more plants, baby plants from that, then if you had a substance that made the animals that would eat you sick, it's going to be more likely that you're going to survive and be able to procreate and continue the species of that plant. So that's what a lectin is, and it actually can affect the gut health. Now, chocolate, coffee, and olive oil are actually good. So I just wanted to let you know that there's still lots of things that you can eat that don't have lectins in them. When we heal the gut, we also have to avoid microbiome destroyers. So the things that destroy your healthy microbiome are antibiotics that can wipe out the good bugs, and that can also include disrupting the H. pylori, and that can take up to 2 years to reestablish the same level of diversity that you went into before you had a round of antibiotics. So please do not underestimate how damaging a round of antibiotics can be. You may need to do it because it's a life-saving thing that comes up and there's no other choice. Circumstances can happen. However, you need to then plan on spending another year or two to recover from that and being very proactive on how you're going to, what strategies you're going to use in order to rebuild the diversity in the microbiome. Now, it turns out that H. pylori is a good bacteria that actually tells the brain when it's satiated by triggering a hormone called ghrelin to stop being produced. So ghrelin is the appetite hormone. So when you're hungry, the ghrelin levels in your body are high. And H. pylori is in the stomach, and it will get triggered. And when it then starts to express, then the ghrelin hormone will downregulate. And that's when you feel full. So if you have bad bugs in your gut, they can communicate to the brain to make you crave and what those bad bugs want, which might be junk food or sugar. And it can also help you or force you to not pay attention to when you're satiated, when you don't need to keep eating. Splenda is another microbiome destroyer, and it actually destroys 50% of the good gut flora. So diet soft drinks can actually cause more weight gain. The small box on the bottom that shows the injections going into the meat, the reason that I have that there is because oftentimes conventional meats are injected with antibiotics. And so you could be eating the conventional meat, which actually is coming along with antibiotics in it. And that could be actually disrupting your microbiome as well. So beware of that. Now, if we need to restore the gut, how do we do that? Well, the first thing we need to do is we need to weed out the bad bugs. Then we need to seed or plant the good bugs. And then we have to feed the good bugs, the good bacteria. And so the bad bacteria like to eat things that are different from what the good bacteria like to eat. So the good bacteria are the E. coli, the bifidobacteria, the lactobacilli, the Faecalibacterium Prausnitzii, right? Try saying those 3 times fast, right? But those are some examples of some of the good bacteria, and you'll recognize some of them because people think, oh, I'm going to eat some yogurt because it's got the bifidus or the lactobacillus in it, and that's good because that's going to help that diversity in the microbiome. But there's even more to it than that. The bad bacteria are the Campylobacteria, the Clostridium difficile, the Methanobrevibacteria smithii, that's the one that's associated with the obesity, Enterococcus faecalis. So these are all some of the examples of the bad ones. But you don't have to pronounce them. You just need to know what are the things you need to do to not feed the bad ones and only feed the good ones. And so remember, those bad bugs can communicate to your brain and affect what your behavior is as well. So we need to simply make sure that we're feeding the good bugs. And then once we've got those robust, they can actually sort out the bad bugs in most cases if we can just really populate with good bugs. So how do we weed, feed, and seed the gut? So sometimes we have to actually do things that will cut out the bad bugs. And I like to do specific testing with patients to see which ones actually need a more robust or aggressive weeding program. And otherwise, we can get the job done by seeding and feeding the gut. So let's look at what foods would be the healthy foods that would promote the healthy bacteria in the gut. And that would include the foods that include prebiotics, which are substances that feed the probiotics, which are the bugs themselves. Now, the good foods are going to not only be a source of prebiotic, but they're also going to be antifungal, so they can starve out the bad bugs. And the key substances are inulin and acacia. Those are the best ways to feed the healthy bugs in our gut, with inulin and acacia. And the foods that hold the inulin and acacia are the jicama, asparagus, the Jerusalem artichoke, onions and leeks, dandelion greens, garlic, the acacia powder, and also chicory root. Chicory root has a lot of inulin in it. So those are the things that your good bacteria are going to love if you put those in to help feed them and help them to become more robust. The next step with dealing with weight loss resistance and inflammation is fixing the cell. So I want to just unpack this a little bit. I want to geek out a little bit with you on some science here and some physiology. But essentially, you know, when your kids are not listening and you're yelling and yelling and yelling at them and they're still not listening, right? The information's just not getting in. And so if the cell membrane is unhealthy, then all the messengers that come along up to that cell membrane can be yelling and yelling, but if they cannot get through that cell membrane to deliver their message, then no change is going to occur. So, you know, you could have all kinds of gasoline ready to put into the car, but if it doesn't get in, the car is not going anywhere. So that's why the cell has to be able to get the message from the hormones, and that's why inflammation gets in the way. Let me show you that right now. So here we have a cell, and you can see that the cell has in the inside of it, it has the DNA, and that's the blueprint for making more cells, and that's the blueprint for telling the cell what it needs to do. However, the message for the DNA to tell the cell what to do has to be triggered actually from the hormones and the messengers on the outside of the cell that come up to the edge of the cell, and they fit into this receptor. Now, a receptor is kind of like a keyhole, and the substances on the outside are like keys, and they have to fit in. And so there's a vitamin D receptor on the cell membrane. When that vitamin D shows up and it fits into the receptor, it's going to then now trigger information to now go, a message to go to the DNA. And now the DNA is going to perform a function, to have the cell perform a function. The same thing is true with the thyroid hormones. The same thing is true with the insulin, with the leptin or the ghrelin. With the same thing, it would be true for having you know, a stress hormone like cortisol show up. That's also going to influence the function of that cell. Now, what's also important is that we have metabolism that happens right inside every cell. And the ATP is the substance in the mitochondria that generates energy for the cell. And so we use that ATP. Well, when we use that energy, it's going to then produce or metabolize toxins that are the byproducts. And those toxins need to get out of the cell. Well, if you have an inflamed cell membrane, then the toxins can't get out, the nutrients can't get in, and the hormones can't deliver their messages. So we have a very unhealthy cell as a result. And that is what can then lead to weight loss resistance, is we're not getting rid of toxins, we're not getting the hormone messaging going in, and we're not getting the nutrients into the cell that we need because the cell membrane is inflamed. So we have to address that inflammation. And how would you know if you have cellular inflammation? Well, there actually are tests that we can run that can tell us that. And one important factor, let me just back up for a minute here. One important factor for the cell membrane is it's made up of lipids or fats. So we have to have healthy fats in our diet in order to make up the important fats in the cell membrane. And that is one of the problems in our diets, is that we have unhealthy oils and unhealthy fats that are getting into our diets, and therefore we create imbalances. So the omega-3 fats are what bring suppleness to the cell membrane so that those receptors can morph and change. And when we have too many omega-6 fats in our diet that come from grains, then, and also comes from conventional meats. They are much higher in omega-6 because they're fed grains instead of grass. When we look at all those factors in our diet that are leading to an overload of omega-6s, that throws things out of balance. The omega-6s are important in the cell membrane to create structure. But if there's too many omega-6s, we'll get rigidity in the cell membrane instead of suppleness. And when you get rigidity, those receptor sites can't change the way they need to. And then we can't have the messages getting into the cell. So there's actually a test. There's a couple of tests that I recommend that are very simple to do. One is looking at what is the evidence that you may be exposed to lots of toxins and that it could be affecting even your nervous system. There's a questionnaire on my website that I can offer to folks. It's called the Neurotoxic Questionnaire. And actually, I'm just going to make it easy for you. And anybody that wants to take the Neurotoxic Questionnaire, just text to our phone number, 802-985-9850. Just text NTQ, which stands for Neurotoxic Questionnaire. And then we'll send you, we'll need to just ask you for your email. And we'll send you a copy of the Neurotoxic Questionnaire. And then you can take that and it can actually help to identify if you are exposed to toxins, if they are affecting your function, and even what types of toxins might be affecting your function. But we also have another test we can do, which is a finger prick test, which looks at the omega-3 index in your body. And it'll tell us how inflamed your cells are and the cell walls, how inflamed they are. So I do recommend that test as well. If you're curious about that, again, just let us know, and we have those tests right here in the office, so you can get one of those and we can measure it. And then in 3 or 4 months, we can measure it again, because what this test measures is not just what you had for lunch today. It actually is measuring what you've been doing, what your lifestyle has been for the last 3 months. And so then if we change our lifestyle and we go for 3 or 4 months, then we're going to retest and see, is it working what we're doing? So it's a great tool to use. So the omega-3 index plus test, it's a blood test that measures the percentage of omega-3 fatty acids that are in the red blood cell membranes, and they represent all the cell membranes. That's why we can use the blood cell as a finger prick, because whatever's in the red blood cell membranes, we're going to see them in the other ones as well. And red blood cells, they live for about 121 days. So that is, about little 3 or 4 months. And so if you do change your diet, the first cells we're going to see those changes in is going to be in the red blood cells, because they only live for 3 or 4 months. And so then we just do a retest after a few months. And so an omega-3 index, the desirable range we want is 8 to 12%. And that's an indicator of better overall health. And there are 64 fatty acids in the membrane, and 4 of them are EPA and DHA, which are coming from fish oils. And that's what we would use as a remedy. That's one of the remedies we would use if you do show that you have a lot of inflammation in your body. So the omega-3 index that we're looking for is that 6.25%. So how do we regain control of our hormones? It's going to be looking at food quality, food quantity, food rhythms, activity levels, social stress, and sleep patterns. So let's just unpack these a little bit here. When we talk about food quality, I want to bring your attention to something called glyphosate. Glyphosate is otherwise known as Roundup, and it's something that we've used on our lawns to try and get rid of weeds, but it's also something that the food industry has used to, what they do is they use pesticides and herbicides like Roundup, but they have to make GMO foods. They have to genetically modify the plants that they use it on so that those plants don't die from the toxins that they're putting on the farms. And so the GMO foods are the ones that are linked to glyphosate. However, what they now know is that when they spray glyphosate over a field, only about 10% of it actually lands on the crops that they're targeting. The other 90% is carried off in the wind. And so we're now finding that rain contains glyphosate. And so the organic farm right next to the conventional farm, the organic farm, we're finding glyphosate on that farm too, because it's actually in the air. So we have to be doing things that are going to protect our bodies from the glyphosate. And if we can reduce it going into our bodies from eating the crops that it goes right onto, that's a step in the right direction. But there are a few other things I want to introduce you to as well. So the quality of the food, when people talk about, well, what's the difference between organic or inorganic? At least the organic is not spraying it directly on the food. So you do want to be choosing the higher quality foods. I love the idea of buying local because you can get to know your farmers and you can actually know whether or not, what their practices are. So that's why we talk about food quality, how important it is for that. Now, also, we want to look at food quantity. Now, sometimes people think all I need to do is just eat less and I should be able to lose weight. But the quality of the food is really important because if you're putting inflammatory foods in, then you're just going to keep screwing up that cell membrane, and it's going to be really hard for you to lose the weight and gain the health that you want. So the quantity is important. We do want to be disciplined, but that's not the only answer to this. It turns out that food rhythms are also important. What is the timing of how we're eating in our day? If we're eating a lot of food late at night, then that's going to tank our goals for getting that ideal body. So we want to have food rhythms. And if we think about paleo rhythms, like what did our ancestors do for the rhythms in their day? And what they did is they would, imagine this, you wake up in the morning, you're hungry, and so you have to go get food. And so it might take you a few hours to chase down that rabbit, and then you're going to feast on the brain first, and then you're going to eat the organs. And then if you still are hungry, you'll chew on the flesh, and then you're going to, just to get that out of the way, then you're going to suck on the bone marrow. And so a lot of the foods that we would have eaten as paleo man would have had a lot of fat in them, and it would have had a lot of nutrient density. So the organs have a lot of density of nutrition in them. But nowadays we just don't eat that way. And not only that, but you think of paleo man, paleo man would not have woken up in the morning and got on the phone and had food delivered to their cave, right? They would have to work to go get their food. And then once they got it, they were good, they ate that rabbit, but now they might not catch another rabbit for a couple of days. So they might actually be vegetarian for a few days. And then they catch the rabbit again, and now so a paleo rhythm might look something closer to that. And I'm going to talk more about more details of that paleo diet style. Now, activity levels are also important because, again, look at paleo man. We would have had to have exercised a lot in order to get the food that we need to provide the energy. So we have to expend energy in order to get energy to keep ourselves alive and healthy. So activity is actually programmed in that we should only exercise on the days we're going to eat, because that's the way our bodies were designed, that if we're going to eat, we better expend some energy in order to get that food that we need to eat. Social stress is another factor, and I'm going to unpack that in even more detail, and sleep patterns. So let's move forward so that we can look at, first off, the top 5 dieting lies. So here's one: weight problems. They run in my family. Oh, just eat less and you'll lose weight. Oh, I'll work it off at the gym. Oh, calories are just calories. Sleep has nothing to do with it. Let's unpack each one of these. So weight problems run in my family. Yeah, I've heard this before, but let's look at this. If genes really were the factor, right, we wouldn't see the inflection, the hockey stick inflection point of how fast the epidemic of obesity is growing, because genes don't change that fast. So when someone tells me, yeah, weight problems, they run in my family, just like if they said diabetes, it runs in my family, what I say is, yeah, the problem is not that diabetes runs in your family. The problem is that nobody's running in your family. You're all doing the same poor lifestyle habits. That could be a factor here. So let's look at this a little bit more closely here. When we think of genes and body composition, there are 3 things that are going to be a factor on our body composition. Genes are one of them. What we inherit is definitely one of the factors. And our environment is another factor, and our lifestyle is another one. And where all three of these overlap, this point right in the middle of this, this Venn diagram, these three, this is what your experience is. This is what your body composition is going to be. So if we think that genes are causing the fat and there's nothing you can do about it, okay, hang on. Let's look at the obesity trends here. So in 1990, you can see the color codes down the bottom here, right? White means we didn't have any data on it. Light blue is 0%, and then it goes up to dark blue, which is 15%. And then we start to get into the oranges. The dark orange is like 25%, and then the black is where we're over 30% of the population in that state is obese. So you can see in 1990, there really was no states that had high percentages of obesity. The highest percentage that we have here in 1990 was 14% of that state's population was obese. Then we look at 1998, and whoa, okay, there's a lot of dark blue here, which means we're getting up close to 20%, and the pink is where we are now, into 20 to 24% of the population. And then we look here, and you can see Colorado, there was no obesity there. And then it went up to blue, right? Is that Colorado there? I think that's Colorado there, right? So at any rate, you can see that all of this trending is going in the wrong direction. Now, I want you to notice one other thing here. The obesity trends seem to be focused in this part of the country. Well, this is the Mississippi Valley right here. And we just talked about how glyphosate travels on the wind and it rains down. And so that rain is following and it's concentrating the glyphosate in this Mississippi Valley. And this is where we're seeing the most obesity. This is also known as Cancer Alley, because we see an awful lot of cancer in this category, in this vicinity as well. So important to recognize this. This cannot be genetic, what we're looking at right here, this trend changing this fast. So if it's not genetic, right, then we have to just recognize that our genes are something that we inherit from 3,700 generations before us. And what we inherited was because it had value. We only inherited the genes that had value to be passed on. And there is a value to having genes that maybe you would gain weight easier than somebody else. Why would we keep a gene like that if in our today's world it would be so unhealthy? There are reasons for that. And when we look at the environment, that is what has changed. So the genes didn't change in that short period of time, but the environment and the lifestyle did change. And some of that environment, you can't hold your breath when you go outside. You can't, necessarily not eat anything at all because it might have some glyphosate on it. We have to be proactive with this. So if we look at our lifestyle, this is where we're going to actually move the dial the most, because this is completely 100% choice. Eat, move, and think. How you eat, how you move, and how you think is going to be the key here. And so it's all about looking at not just the environment, but also our relationships, our strategies that we use, and all of the choices that we make. So looking at all these pieces, when we think of Donna, who accomplished that in 1 year, lost 60 pounds and 40 inches, did her genes change in 1 year? No, her genes actually stayed the same, but how the genes were expressing and how her body was adapting to the stresses that she was exposed to, that was what did change. So healthy comes in all shapes and sizes, and there is a healthy version of every body type. So the ideal weight, all of these people may actually be the ideal weight that we're looking at right here. There could be the ectomorphs that are more kind of skeletally themed, the mesomorphs, which are more muscularly themed, and the endomorphs that just are rounder, and that's genes. But there's a healthy version of every single one of these. So when we look at getting 15 pounds healthier, we do want to look at body composition, but we want to look at the percentage of lean tissue versus fatty tissue. We want to look at what the optimal ranges would be and what biomarkers we're using for this. So, and I've got I have a table that I'm going to show you in a minute. So biomarkers, we could use a scale that's measuring our weight. That could be one of the biomarkers that we use, but the abdominal measurement is going to be very important. And the body fat percentage or the body composition is also going to be another factor that's very useful. So these are for the abdominal girth that's measuring around your waist, and the percentage of body fat that goes with when we look at the percentage of fat when we do these measurements. So women are going to have a higher body fat percentage than men because of the way we're designed. We should have that. And there's an essential level of fat that we need. So women need 10 to 13%. And if you're an athlete and you're a woman, you're looking at around 14 to 20%. But even just being at a fitness level, that is still going to be 21 to 41%. It's acceptable to be 25 to 31% fat. And obesity is when you're getting over 32%. And for men, it's going to be when you're over 25%. So that's how you want to be interpreting that measurement. Now, just eat less and you'll lose weight. That's another myth as well. And so, when we look at, I had a patient in the practice, and she actually was just trying to eat less and less and less. And she ended up really getting into trouble because her body started to interpret that she was experiencing the only stress that our ancestors ever would have experienced, which would be when there's no food at all, when there's a famine. Her body was interpreting that she was in a famine. And so it was doing everything it could to preserve fat because the fat was going to be needed when the famine got worse and worse and worse. And so it turned out that she was still in carb burning mode, and her body was just trying to preserve as much of the fat as possible. And so any carbs that she took in, she would burn the carbs, but she would keep storing the fat. So when people try food deprivation, it's going to fail. It's not sustainable. And if you think of not putting the food in, over time, the body has to respond to that in some way. Just like if you try to hold your breath, after a while, you're just going to take a breath again. So if you try to not eat, your body is just going to get more and more efficient on less and less. And so the metabolism will change, but it's going to change in an unhealthy way because your body's going to go into survival mode. And that's what then happens is when people go on yo-yo diets, like they starve themselves and then they can't sustain it. And then they fall off of that diet and then they eat a lot. And now they're just going up and down. So that's just torture to do it that way. So yo-yo dieting is a problem because your body is intelligent and your metabolism is going to shift and slow down into survival mode as a way for you to survive. And so when you slow your metabolism, you're going to prevent the results that you want. And having said that, I do want to now counter the other side of this story because many people actually have successfully used fasting as a way to change their metabolism. And fasting, there are healthy ways to do fasting, including intermittent fasting. So I do want to spend a little bit more time on that so that it's clear. But how long could one do a water fast? This was a 27-year-old obese Scotsman. He weighed 456 pounds and he water fasted for over a year. He had no food for over a year, 382 days, and he lost 276 pounds. His target weight was 180 and he hit it. And then he started to eat and he never gained it back. Now, while he was doing this, this was not just doing this rogue on his own. He actually was being monitored. There were medical professionals that were watching very closely what was happening with his body. And what they saw was that all of his nutrition markers remained normal. Like all of the ways you would measure if somebody was eating and getting enough nutrients in, they were measuring that and they were all normal. His electrolytes actually even eventually normalized and just became stable without having to take any kind of supplements. His depression lifted, his neurotransmitters and hormones, they all normalized. And so what he was doing is he was eating himself. He was metabolizing all that stored fat, and it had nutrients in it that he had stored in. As he had gained all that weight, he stored it all within him. And so there's a whole science behind doing this right. You would have to do it right. So I'm not saying that that this is the way that's going to work for everybody, but I just want to put it out there that if you do fast properly, it's actually amazing how the body can then normalize so many things. Calories are calories. I've heard this one. I just have to reduce my calories. And remember that there are different types of calories, and there are chemicals that will impact your physiology in the foods that you're eating. So every food is a chemical, and it will impact the metabolism in different ways. Empty calories are calories that have no nutritional value, but they have energy to burn, and they will take up the room of nutritionally dense foods, and they can also bring toxins in with them. And so I want to give you an example. I had a patient, and he was counting his calories, and he was literally looking at every food he was eating, and he was counting all these calories. And when I went over it with him, that he said, yeah, I can't seem to lose weight, even though I know if I eat this many calories, I should be dropping this many pounds. And so when we looked closely at his diet, it turned out he was still drinking Fanta orange soda. And it was diet Fanta that he was drinking. And I said, well, how many of these are you having? He says, 5 a day or more. So he was guzzling these things down, but he thought, oh, it's a diet soda. There's no calories in here. I'm going to be fine. Well, it turned out it had aspartame in it. And I showed him some research that showed that the exact ingredients in those diet Fantas actually cause weight gain. He was blown away. And so he was able to quit that terrible habit. It was such an addiction. He was able to just muster up his willpower once he understood why he needed to do it. And he stopped it, and he immediately just started to drop the weight so that he was able to reach his goals. But again, he was just counting calories. He thought that was the way to do it. And the science clearly tells us that is not the way to do it. Now, again, let's look at this idea of toxic foods getting in. Toxic foods, or empty calorie foods that are nutritionally deficient, when we take that and then we add to it, and actually, if we look at more closely, well, how could it be that we are eating so many toxic and deficient foods? Well, all we have to do is just look at the guidance that we've been getting for decades. And this is the food pyramid that the FDA promotes. And if you look at it, it's got all the grains on the bottom. It's got fruits and vegetables next, meat next, and dairy next. And at the top are the fats and the sugars. This is the pyramid that is the traditional pyramid. And I'll tell you what, when we look at the difference between how a fat burns in your body and how a carb burns in your body, it's actually very similar to looking at a wood stove in your house and the propane stove in your kitchen. The wood stove is going to burn very dirty. You better have a flue that's working that can get that smoke out of the house, or you're in trouble. And yet the propane stove, you don't need a flue because it burns so clean. Fats burn very clean, and carbs burn very dirty. So if you are in carb burning mode, your cells are going to get gunked up with lots of toxins that you're going to need to manage. And if you also have inflammation because of eating all the grains and having the imbalance in the omega-3s and omega-6s, those toxins can't get out of the cells. So now you are creating sicker and sicker cells. And so obesity is the outcome of this food pyramid. If you're going to, this is actually the perfect diabetes pyramid as well. And so remember, although that we think and we've identified that fat is sick, eating healthy fats is not what makes you fat. And that's a myth. And we're going to look at that as well. So obesity means sick, and it's the linchpin to chronic disease. So let's look at what would actually a healthy diet look like if we look at our genetic makeup and what we were designed for. We're going to look at the wild hunter and gatherer. What were they eating? They would have had high carbohydrate, but it would have been complex carbohydrates. They would have been eating a lot of vegetables, fruits, some fruits, especially in season. They would have also had low to moderate amounts of good fat. So that fat that comes from a brain or an organ meat, or even the fat in the animal, or from some of the fatty foods they might be eating, nuts and things like that. They would have had high protein. They would have had no refined foods, zero, no dairy, and no sugar. They might have come across a honeycomb every now and then they would gorge on that if they came across it. But other than that, the fruits would have been a little bit of sweet, and occasionally honey, but they would not have had any of the sugar that we have in our diets today. The industrialized modern human has high refined carbohydrates, is low in fat. We've been programmed to think low fat is the way to go for many decades, which has created so many problems for people. We've also been told that low protein, stay away from that red meat, is the way to go. And we were told that it just has to taste good. So sugary foods. And then we're told, oh, everything in moderation. Well, if you're eating the moderation of sugar in today's diet, you're still off the chart and you're going to be sabotaging your results. Because even if we look back into the 1800s, the amount of sugar we ate in the 1800s was very, very low. So moderation, like Little House on the Prairie, how much sugar did they eat? That level in moderation that you might be able to get away with. But nowadays, that amount of sugar moderation, you're going to be undermining your goals. And so we just have to really look at the standard American diet is a diet style that is pushing you towards obesity, diabetes, and metabolic illness. And if we compare that to our genetic design, recognize that we would have chased down a rabbit for lunch. But nowadays we chase down lunch with a Coke. That's what's happened. We've really gone sideways with this. And if you look at, the wild hunter-gatherer, and you put that same species, that same genetic makeup into a captive place, right? You're going to get bad outcomes. Now, of course, this is a photoshopped picture of this giraffe in captivity that is not fed the right things, and this is what you would get. But I want to make a point with this, that if we take the genes that we have, what we were designed for, and we create the right environment through healthy lifestyle choices, we can actually get that level of fitness and ideal body design that we were genetically, that we've inherited. Poor food quality is what causes us to fail. Toxic choices, deficient choices, and unbalanced choices are also part of the problem. So we talked about the glyphosate. We've talked about the empty calories. Even if you're eating organic sugar and organic grains, it's still in an unbalanced way. We're going to have problems because of the way it will load up the omega-6s and create that cell wall inflammation. So poor food quality leads to the toxic deficient foods, and it's not just about calories. We can be creating deficiencies by filling ourselves with nutrient deficient calories and choices. So we can feel full, but we can actually be very deficient. And Edward's story with the Fanta is the exact description of that. Now let's just look at the hormones here. These are the hormones that are going to be important to normalize and bring into healthy balance if we're going to hit what our goals are for our ideal body. So insulin and glucagon work synergistically. It's kind of like a yin-yang kind of balance that happens. And so insulin is the sugar that is what gets sugar out of the bloodstream. That's the role of insulin. So if you eat a sugary meal or a high carb meal, high grains that break down into sugars, if you put a lot of sugar into your bloodstream, the body says immediately, okay, there's no reason for me to need this much sugar in the blood right now. I don't have a tire to fight. I don't have a lot of demand on me right now. So I want to store that sugar so I do have it for later. And so the insulin takes the sugar out of the bloodstream so that we can store it as a fat. So insulin is the fat storage hormone. Glucagon is what puts sugar into the bloodstream. So if suddenly a tiger shows up and you need to have as much blood sugar as fast as possible to get to the muscles to be turbocharged, then you will use glucagon as a way to transform glycogen in the liver into glucose. So you have it available immediately as a burst of energy. Leptin and ghrelin have the same kind of yin-yang balance to them. So leptin is the hunger suppression hormone or the satiation hormone. So it suppresses your appetite. When you're full, leptin will increase in your body and flood your system. And when you're hungry, ghrelin is flooding the system. So the two of those work in conjunction with each other. Now, cortisol is the stress hormone. And so when cortisol shows up, our body basically needs to get ready to fight or run, fight or flight. And so all of our metabolism is going to shift to be able to survive the next minute. And so cortisol is something that actually drives inflammation, and it's the stress hormone. When we think of these hormones, insulin is the fat storage hormone. That's the way we need to start thinking about it. When you have elevated insulin, it locks you into fat storage mode. And so remember that at any moment in time, you're either going to be burning fat or you're going to be storing fat. And insulin is what locks you into that fat storage mode. So what is it that causes elevated insulin? It's going to be based on two things: the food choices that you make. So if you're eating a lot of sugars and refined carbs, the fast carbs, and also dairy can also push up that insulin, especially if it's non-fat or low-fat dairy. Those are sugar bombs that are going into you. So if you're going to eat dairy, you definitely want to eat the full fat. But the food choices are what are going to trigger the elevated insulin. But what will also trigger it is energy imbalance. So when we have excess calories, too many calories, when we're just overeating, or sedentary living, when we're under moving, those are all the things that are going to elevate insulin. Now, understanding the glycemic index is also important here, because understanding that when we put sugary foods in, it's going to spike our blood sugar, which is going to then increase and spike our insulin levels to take care of that. Whereas if we have the blood sugar raised slowly and then it decreases slowly, insulin doesn't need to be triggered to the same degree, because it's at your overall blood sugar is at lower levels. So if we were to eat a very sugary food, even pure sugar like glucose, which is the reference food, it shows how many minutes over time that sugar is in our bloodstream and how our body tries to get it out. So we have a big spike. The insulin comes in at the top of that spike to start to move that sugar out of the bloodstream, and over time it drops. So that's why we can get a kind of a sleepiness that can happen after we've had a lot of carbs or a sugary meal, because the blood sugar increase alerts us and then it just drops and we tank. Whereas lentils are something that would just come in slowly. It takes a while for us to digest them, and then the carbs that come out of those lentils, they may have a lot of fat in them as well, and then that just increases a little bit and then decreases slowly over time. What are the high glycemic foods? Well, you can see them right here. They look familiar. They're ones you recognize, right? All the refined grains are going to have these high glycemic indexes. So the cereals that we eat, the carbs, the pretzels, rice cakes are thought of as healthy, but they are carbs. The breads, the waffles, graham crackers, the Cheerios, right? We can see it all there. The rice. Now, short ground white rice doesn't have the hull on it the way brown rice does. And so we've lost some proteins in there. We've lost some fiber in there, and we're getting more pure carbs. Corn chips, white bread, even whole wheat bread. Look at that. Whole wheat bread is as just about as high a glycemic index as white bread is. So don't fool yourselves by thinking that the whole grains are necessarily less impactful. If we look at our typical conventional American diet, we will see that the refined sugars, the refined vegetable oils, the grains, and the dairy actually make up 75% of our diet. And yet, these are foods that would not even have been considered foods at all to our ancestors. And what's left that our ancestors would have been eating as 100% of their diet is the meats and the fish, the eggs, the nuts, the seeds, the legumes, and the fruits, and the vegetables. So those would have actually made up their entire diet. And yet now we have 70% of our energy is coming from foods that our ancestors would never have even, those foods didn't even exist for our ancestors to eat. And so these foods that are comprising, 70% of our energy in our typical Western diets, they were unknown in the ancestral human diets. And these are the foods: breads, cereals, rice and pasta, dairy products, refined vegetable oils, alcohol, fatty meats, added salt, refined sugars, except for honey, which our ancestors would have had. But otherwise, these are the most common foods that we have in our diet. And they didn't even exist for our ancestors. So when we look at over time, there definitely is an inflection point that has occurred with the epidemic of overweight and obesity. And we can see it happened right here right around the mid to late 1970s. So what changed at that time? Well, this shows us what changed. So if we look at the generations of humans over the years, if we go back to the 1800s, certainly we did have sugar available in the diet in the 1800s. But again, it was in very low levels. And yet when we see feedlot produced meats were introduced, then refined grains were introduced in the late 1800s. The refined vegetable oils were right around the turn of the century, and the hydrogenated oils came in. But look what was introduced in the mid 1970s and early 80s. It was the high fructose corn syrup. And that is one of the factors that has tanked our population's health and really caused such an inflection point in the obesity epidemic. And so we have to reconcile that. So you want to stay as far away from high fructose corn syrup as possible. And, and yet the way that it is advertised, high fructose corn syrup, they describe it as made from corn. It's natural. And it has the same health benefits as sugar. That is the tagline that they have for high fructose corn syrup. Run the other way. Look at the labels and stay away from that. Sugar is bondage. It is substance abuse. So we're going to just talk about the elephant in the room right now. Okay. Is that okay with everybody if we just talk about this? It is an addiction. And alcoholics know that it's an addiction because they know that if they switch from their alcohol to sugar as their addiction, it's only a matter of time where they're going to fall off of it because it's just the same addiction. And so it's an ongoing daily battle. Just as alcoholics know, sugar is an ongoing daily battle as well if you're addicted to it. And you just have to not allow it in the house. That is the only way to manage it. The battle is won at the register. Like, do not buy it, do not let it into the house. And it's all about the environment that we're in, and people say, well, just a little Ben & Jerry's in the fridge, in the freezer. No, if it's in the freezer, you will lose that battle. Don't let Ben or Jerry into your freezer because you're not going to be strong enough when it's in the house. It's just, my drawer at work. It's just a little something that I do for myself. It's a little treat. It's 2:00. No one needs to know. It's just right here in my drawer, right? And people just like sneak these things, but it is an addiction. And so, let's just nail this one. Like, are we done with this? Let's just nail this. And if you're not done with it yet, I want you to read the book, Sugar Blues. You read that book, you're only going to come out on the other side. You'll be convinced. So if you can't kick this, you have to just know as much as I do about it. That's the only way to deal with this. So it's bondage. And if we have to look at our relationships, right? Look at our culture. When you want to treat somebody, you want to show them they're special, you give them sugar, right? And so we have to change that. And it is a slippery slope. When you let a little bit in, right, it just goes downhill. Now, I will just tell you that when my daughter was born, I just knew how bad sugar was. And I just realized, okay, we're just going to make it a rule. We have no sugar. We're just doing zero sugar. And we just did that. We were 100% without sugar. And it was an easy decision to make because every time the possibility came up, we simply had to ask the question, does it have sugar in it? And if the answer was yes, we're like, no, thanks. It was simple. It was so simple. And I looked around me and I saw parents that kind of had the 90% rule. Like, we have sugar maybe just 10% of the time. Well, you know what? Those kids, they were always wondering, is this the time that we get sugar? How about now? How about now? How about now? So I'm just saying that it's a lot easier to do something 100% of the time. 90% is really hard. 100% is easy. So I hope that helps some of you out there. All right, so let's look at the top 7 dieting pitfalls that people encounter. Drinking calories. Okay, sometimes when we're drinking something, it's like it doesn't count, but actually it does count. And oftentimes people make these smoothies. They're all the rage. And they just are pretty much a melted down sundae is what they are. For some people, the way that they make them, they're just a sugar bomb. And fructose is actually one of the most aggressive insulin spike foods that we can put in. And so everything needs to be in moderation. And we have to make sure that we get the fiber in as well. So drinking fruit juices is really one of the worst things that you can do. Sodas are in the same category. But I will tell you that, you know, my brother tells me he got a NutriBullet and he says it caused diabetes in him. The NutriBullet caused diabetes. He was getting all kinds of fruit, fresh organic fruit, and popping it into that NutriBullet and having these smoothies. And he literally went sideways with his blood sugar. And it wasn't until he got rid of the NutriBullet that he actually was able to realize that that was the thing that caused him to become diabetic. And he got rid of it and he got right back on track. Dairy is also something we have to look at. So too much fruit can be a problem. Our ancestors would not have had that much fruit because it just wasn't available. When it was available, they would, you know, gather it and eat it, but it wasn't in the level of availability that we have today. And so just make sure that if you are going to eat fruit, you eat the whole fruit and not just the juice of it. Dairy actually can be acidic, and it actually can promote osteoporosis, it turns out, and especially when it is the pasteurized, homogenized forms of dairy. And especially if you get the fat-free, then you're actually putting a sugar bomb in as well. So yogurt is a, you know, people think of it as a source of probiotic foods, and it is a source of probiotic, but most of the yogurts that are out there are just loaded with sugar. So you want to be very careful about, even when you're using yogurt that has the advantage of the probiotics, you want to make sure that it's the kind that is plain, that doesn't have any of the sweeteners and the sugars added to them. And you want to make sure you get the full fat. And I would even go as far as saying, get the cultured milk from the grass-fed cows that are producing that milk. And that's going to be the healthiest form. Many vegetarians become grainitarians. And so sometimes people are avoiding meat, but they're just becoming grainitarians. And so you can be a vegetarian and do it the right way, but it's incredibly hard. And so a lot of people, that obesity actually comes with vegetarianism for some people. Snacks. Let's just lay down the line here. So healthy snacking is one where you're going to have everything that it would be in a healthy meal would be in a healthy snack. It's just a smaller version of it. Many times people are confusing the difference between a treat and a snack. So sometimes, you know, a treat is something that you have every once in a while on a special occasion in a very limited amount. But having a treat every day in between meals, that's a snack, and a snack needs to be healthy. So a treat now and then may not be healthy, but snacks need to be healthy. So let's just lay down the law about that, the difference between snacks and treats. Because a lot of the things that are described as snack foods actually should be in the treat category because they are empty calories. So we want to be aware of that. And now also watch out for post-exercise binging. I just worked out and now I can go eat as much as I want of whatever I want because I just worked out, right? So that is a problem. Like, someone might have just done a spinning class and they burned a whole 200 calories, and then they go and get a Frappuccino that has 700 calories to it, of empty calories, of lots of sugar. And so really watch out for that myth. And then the idea of skipping breakfast. So this one is a tricky one because it can be a dieting pitfall for people, because we want to make sure we're setting a strong hormonal balance for the day. And so if we can have 20 grams of protein in the morning to get our satiating hormones set for the rest of the day, that's going to be our best strategy. 20 grams of protein as the first meal of the day. But I will say that intermittent fasting can be very useful and successful for a lot of people as well. And so intermittent fasting, I'm going to cover at the very end, but it is when we are pushing off what our first meal of the day is. The key to it is whenever the first meal happens, you want to make sure it's proteins and fats, and you do not want it to be a typical breakfast food, which tends to be carbs loaded with sugar. So donuts and pastries and waffles and pancakes, those are thought of as breakfast foods, but actually they are one of the worst foods to consume as your first meal because it just sets you into carb burning mode and fat storage mode. So pay close attention to that first meal of the day. And this is so bad. How bad is it getting in our culture? Do you know that they are actually spending tens of millions of dollars creating special wings for pediatric units that can move obese children around, 600-pound children? Like, we have special units in hospitals now that are for moving around obese children. So that's how serious it gets. So we have to do this right. We have to get it right, not just for ourselves, but for our kids as well. So what would be the correct paleo-correct model to be using? Well, there's a program called Bonfire Health that does a great job of teaching people the best lifestyle choices to make. And so the Bonfire Correct way that you'll learn is unlimited vegetables, abundant lean and natural meats, some fruit, nuts, and seeds, limited starch, and no sugar. This would be the Paleo Correct way, and it would be part of an overall lifestyle. And so again, we have to think of it's not just about what you're eating, but it's the other lifestyle choices you make as well. So why do I reference paleo? Because our genes are what dictate our nutritional needs. And our genes were shaped over time by our environmental experience. It was the environment we were in that helped to design how our genes were going to then play out over the next 40,000 years. So our genes really haven't changed in over 40,000 years. And it wasn't up until about 500 generations ago. So for 3,700 generations, we come to the present time, but it was for 3,200 of those generations, we were eating the same diet. And it's only about 500 generations ago that we started to change that. And there's no evidence of ancestral degenerative disease when we look at ancient man. The agricultural revolution is what changed all of that. And so what does paleo look like? Again, it's going to be, as we already said, the unlimited non-starchy vegetables, the good carbs, and none of the refined grains, the bad carbs. We're going to have plenty of fruits and berries. We're going to have relatively high animal protein, moderate amounts of the good fats. We're going to be high in fiber, high potassium, low sodium. We're going to have, our foods are going to be overall alkaline to the body versus acidic. And it's going to be rich in the phytochemicals, the vitamins, the minerals, and the antioxidants. Other diets similar to paleo that you might have heard about, like the zone diet, it's very similar. It's going to be looking at 40% of the complex carbs, 30% protein, 30% fat. So they're kind of using a rule of thirds. But basically, what is your plate going to look like if you're eating in a healthy way? You're going to ask yourself, with every plate that you make of food, where is the plant? Where's the fat and where's the protein? So every meal that you have, you want to ask that question. Where are the plants? Where are the healthy fats? And where are the healthy proteins? Every time that you eat, even when it's a snack, you want to ask that question. Where's the healthy plants? Where's the healthy fat? Where's the healthy protein? So what would some of these dishes look like? Here's some examples. We have omelets with veggies and sausage. You're going to be hungry after the next few slides here. Eggs with avocado, bacon, and tomato. Bison steak with avocado and greens. Almond flour pancakes and blackberries. Grilled ahi peppers, avocado, and greens. We have chicken thighs with apple, almonds, and greens, and Swedish meatballs. But this version is not going to have any of the breadcrumbs in it, right? So pretty much many of the foods that you think of as comfort foods, there are healthy versions of them. Here's another one, wild-caught salmon on greens, shrimp and lobster tail with avocado. So the do's and the don'ts, again, the do's are the non-starchy vegetables, some fruit, meat, poultry, fish, range-fed eggs, natural fats, some nuts and seeds, and drink water. And the don'ts are the refined carbohydrates, the cereals and grains, the sweeteners, the bad vegetable oils. So remember, the exception for vegetable oils are going to be olive oil, avocado oil, palm oils, and coconut oils. Otherwise, you want to get your fats from healthy animals. Dairy products are a don't, but again, if you're going to do them, make sure you're doing the fermented ones like the yogurt and the full fat from the healthy animals. And then soda, juice, and alcohol are also the don'ts. Now, the easiest way to transform your diet if you're eating more conventionally is to look at the 3 exchanges. So look at the grains that you're eating right now and start to change them over to the ancient grains. And then the sugars that you're eating change from the processed and the artificial to the natural ones, including stevia or monk fruit would be a healthier version. And then change the fats, exchange the toxic fats to the healthy fats. And if you're not sure what those exchanges are, we have a great handout in the office that's called the anti-inflammatory diet. It's a one page, both sides of the page, that just goes through in a very easy way, recognizing which are the foods that are inflammatory and which are the foods that are anti-inflammatory, and how do you make the 3 exchanges. And so then we can look at not just the toxic deficient foods that are part of this perfect hormonal storm, but it's our sedentary lifestyles, it's energy imbalance, it's us being in fat storage mode. So wild humans in captivity, they start to look at like the food pyramid that we just talked about, that it was the unhealthy one. We've literally engineered movement out of our lives, and it's sad but true, but we need to actually get more movement into our lives again. Humans living today inherited a genome that was programmed for daily physical activity and a high fiber diet. We were programmed to expend energy in order to get the energy we need to eat. So we're not living the life that we were designed for, and the life that is required if we're going to be healthy. So remember, the things that cause elevated insulin, it's also the energy imbalances, the excess calories that come from overeating or under moving. And so again, if we compare the modern life, both food and movement, to our ancient genome and design, we can see where things have gone sideways. Okay, well, I'll just work it off at the gym. Movement's important. I'm just going to go, work out as hard as I can. Okay, we still have to look at energy balance. So we do have caloric needs, so we need to get calories in as fuel to burn, but we also have to recognize that the types of foods that we're eating can impact our hormones, and we also have to look at what we're putting in and what we're outputting, and there has to be a balance there. So we want to support hard training and lean muscle, but not fat. And the foods that you eat do act like chemicals in the body, and they will have a hormonal impact. So remember that our genes, if we think of paleo man, right? They had to work so hard just to get food and to get shelter and just to live. They expended so much energy just to live that we were actually designed to be as thrifty as possible. We were designed to be really good at storing fat because it took so much energy just to survive. And so food used to be hard to find and hard to secure. And we still have the same physiology that was designed for that environment for surviving. But the problem is that we have a very easy lifestyle now. And so because we have these thrifty genes that are always looking on trying to conserve energy, it's really easy to consume calories and it's very difficult to burn them. So we actually, as they say, you will never out-train a lousy diet. If we're looking at training, our abs are made in the kitchen, not in the gym. So 30% of it is the gym, but 70% of it is our diet. And so abs are made in the kitchen. All right, so let's just check this out here. Exercise is critical in achieving optimal health. So it actually is what's going to help us to correct the metabolic derangement. And so because we exert ourselves daily to get our food and water and protection, we have to find ways to insert or supplement exercise into our life as though our survival depended on it. I love that context. So just like our poor soils and our diet demands that we reconcile that by adding supplements to reconcile the deficiencies, we actually have a movement deficiency that we have to reconcile by supplementing scheduled, intentional, planned exercise. So it's all about moving, sweating, and panting. So how do you know if you're exercising? This is it. First off, only exercise on the days that you eat. We already said that. Exertion is the key to this. So moving, sweating, and panting is key. You want to have at least 30 minutes a day that you're moving. And it doesn't matter what you do. You want to do what moves you, but you want to make sure that you're getting panting and sweating in. And that's because that is what then pushes our mitochondria to keep building energy. That is what shifts the hormone imbalance and turns the cortisol stress switch off. That is what uses up any sugar that's in the blood and switches us into taking the carb burning, and then actually pushes us so we have to start to switch into fat burning because we use up the carbs very quickly. And so that exercise is the key thing, but make sure you're pushing yourself. Sometimes we encounter people that they walk 5 miles a day and they think that's plenty of exercise. But when you ask them, are you panting or sweating? They are not even breaking a sweat because their body has gotten used to doing that same walk over and over again. So it's really important that you are pushing yourself in whatever exercise you're doing so that you're getting the panting and sweating level. Even if it's just in bursts, you don't have to be panting and sweating for a full 30 minutes, but you want to have bursts of that panting and sweating within that 20 to 30 minutes. And finally, the third part of that is the social stress. So there's chronic psychological stress that can drive the cortisol in our body, but there is another factor as well. Two things are going to affect cortisol levels: chronic psychological stress as well as sleep deprivation. Now, when we think of our ancestors, they would have had short-term stresses that they would have been exposed to, that they would have needed to try to survive, such as, things like fighting with another tribe or fighting with a wild animal or finding shelter because the weather suddenly turned bad. So those would have been short-term stresses. The only long-term stress that our ancestors would have been exposed to would have been famine. That's the only long-term stress. And so anytime that our body goes into chronic stress, the only way our bodies make sense of that is to say, oh, this must be the same as a famine. And so if you're in a famine, the best thing you could do is store fat. And so people that are chronically stressed actually go into the body chemistry that will then continue to store fat. It's our body will act as though we're in a famine for survival. And we're going to store that fat right around our abdomen. We call it centripetal fat because it's the best place to store fat if you still need to move your body around. Like you still need to go out and hunt and gather. If you store it around your belly, you can still climb a tree. So stress gut is another name for that, or belly fat. And another thing that drives cortisol levels is light. So light should be driving our life rhythm with sleep and activity. And what happens is we tend to be psychologically exhausted at the end of the day, but not physically exhausted. And mental stress then kicks in and keeps us up. So we're just thinking, and our cortisol levels stay high. And when the cortisol levels, they really should be fluctuating throughout the day so that they're highest in the morning, which is the time we would be hunting and gathering food, and they should be lowest when it's time to go to sleep. But now, because of social stress and unnatural schedules and unnatural lighting and electronics and screens, our cortisol levels are staying chronically elevated. And so that is what is driving inflammation in the body and keeping us in that mode as though we're fighting the tiger, which then affects our insulin levels. And that's our fat, high insulin levels, insulin resistance, that creates that fat storage. And again, chronic psychological stress is equated with famine. Oh, sleep's got nothing to do with it. I'm just going. I'm not going to get as much sleep because I have to make sure I get my exercise in, right? How many of us are guilty of that? So sleep deprivation is actually a really important piece. And we want to follow a circadian rhythm that's going to be responsive to light. And we want to watch very carefully how unnatural light can put us out of that rhythm. And so again, if you think of paleo man, right? As when the sun went down, it was time to crawl into the cave and go to sleep. And when the sun came up, it was time to go out and find food. So again, because we are not physically active enough to be physically exhausted, it really gets in the way of how well we're able to sleep. Let's look at this idea of sleep deprivation. When the cortisol levels have gone sideways so that they should be low at night and high in the morning. And if we have unnatural schedules where we're just staying up late, as well as that unnatural lighting, it really does affect our hormones. So the leptins will cause our appetite to stay high because the leptins go down. The ghrelin goes up again, which causes the appetite to stay high. It's kind of like people that have that late night eating that they do, right? Oh, I'm kind of hungry before I go to bed. That's because the ghrelin and leptin have gone backwards. The cortisol levels are going to create carb cravings because that's fast turbocharged energy to put in to fight a tiger. So if the cortisol levels stay high, we're going to be craving carbs more. And that is then going to create more insulin, which is going to put us back into that fat storage mode. And so the effect of sleep deprivation on hormones that drives behaviors and metabolism is an important factor here. The best practices for sleep: make sure we use that circadian rhythm as a guide. Try to target 8 to 9 hours of sleep for most adults. For teens, it actually may be even more than that. And once you start to get older in age, 7.5 hours, older folks can get away with and still have a very healthy rhythm to it, but not less than that. You want a dark, quiet, and comfortable environment to be sleeping in. So no little lights all around the room from the different appliances that are on, the clock that has its light shining. Like, just get rid of all of those random lights, cover everything up so it's actually dark, quiet, and comfortable. Having an e-fast before you go to sleep, meaning being away from screens 30 to 90 minutes before bed. So we better finish this workshop up fast so we can turn our screens off here. And having a household culture where everybody's on the same page. So in our house, we all go to bed early at night. Like, that's what you want to be thinking. And that makes it much easier. So what am I asking you to do? I'm asking you to eat more of the healthy foods, but eat plenty of healthy foods, sleep more, panting and sweating exercise, which comes in all forms, right? Can you see yourself doing this, right? Can you see yourself pulling this off, changing your culture so you can have your whole family healthier too? I love this. Given the effectiveness of popular weight loss diets, adoption of a healthy lifestyle is more appropriate for winning the war against chronic disease. And that, again, is from the Journal of Applied Physiology. So we just know that is so true. If we're going to win this war, we need to be hitting it from all of our lifestyle choices. And so what does chiropractic have to do with all this? Where does this come in? I want to just explain to you that when I'm working with somebody, it's a three-legged stool model that we use, how we get our best results. Adjustments, the chiropractic adjustments in a regular rhythm. The adjustments actually help to turn the stress switch off. We want to teach people spinal exercises to get their nervous system really healthy. And we want to teach them how to change the bad habits into good habits on how they eat, how they move, and how they think. And so why chiropractic? Why is it important to help people with weight loss resistance? Because the brain controls everything. And the nervous system is composed of the brain as well as the spinal cord that carries the messages from the brain out to the body and back again. And when there's interference in the nervous system, it's going to disturb function in the body. And if you have nerve interference in the spine at the levels that then those nerves go out and they affect things like the thyroid gland, the adrenals, the liver, and the endocrine organs, the hormonal organs, and the digestive organs, any interference in nerves that control those things can affect your ability to have the appropriate weight loss that you're looking for and the healthier body that you want. And so nerve interference also is going to drive up cortisol levels in the body. And we know cortisol drives up the insulin, which is then the fat storage hormone. So if you want to have an ideal body and you want to conquer weight loss resistance, not only do you have to look at how you eat, how you move, and how you think, but you also have to look at whether or not your spine is healthy, because that can impact the function of all of those organs that are important to be healthy in order to achieve your goals. There is the scanning technology that we use, which is how we measure whether you have nerve interference. And so we want to have spines that are clear of and have normal, healthy, functioning nerves. Here, where there's damage or interference in the nerves, we know what the map of the nervous system is and where these nerves go. So these are the nerves that actually do go to things like the thyroid, things like the adrenal glands and the liver and the pancreas and the intestines, and down here to the hormones. So we look very closely at the scans that we do so we can identify if there are places that are interfering with what your goals are for you getting your ideal body. And if you're curious about whether you have this nerve interference and you would like to have a consultation with us and find out whether or not we can help, then again, just text us 15 and 15 consult to our office number 802-985-9850, and we'll set up a consultation so we can talk about what your challenges are and whether or not it would make sense for you to come in so we can check you. I mentioned the Bonfire Health Program. It is a fantastic program. These are for you folks that are the do-it-yourselfers. And so this is exactly where you want to go. And if you're under chiropractic care and you haven't seen this resource before, if you've been in the practice, I want you to actually go here because it's going to unpack so many of these concepts for you. And so Bonfire is, if you want a bonfire, you need three things. And if your health is equivalent to a bonfire, then the three things that you need are fuel, air, and spark. Fuel is how you eat, air is how you move, and spark is how you think. And you actually need to have all three of those if you're going to be healthy. So we've covered these concepts as they relate to weight loss resistance, looking very closely at how you eat, how you move, and stress levels, how you think. And if you want to dive deeper into this, they have a great program that actually it's set up to help people to easily adopt the 39 healthiest habits over 90 days. And this program, it could be worth $5,000 on what people put into programs like this that are trying to change their health. But I will offer it to you. It's no charge. It's free. I'm a bonfire doctor. I'm the only bonfire doctor in Vermont, and I want to introduce it to you. So if you just go to bonfirehealth.com, you'll see that you can just look at the site. It has great resources on it the way it is, but they do have the Bonfire Challenge, and I'll encourage you to sign up for that challenge so that in 90 days, you can actually see another whole level of health for yourself, because what they'll do is they'll send you 3 emails per week, one on how you eat, one on how you move, and one on how you think. And that way you can easily adapt the 39 healthiest habits in just 13 weeks. Now, many people ask me about detoxing, so I do want to cover that in our practice. We have a few detox programs that we use, and it's different strokes for different folks. We have a 10-day detox, as well as a 21-day and a 28-day detox. So you can choose how you want to proceed with it. I can tell you more about it if you're curious about it. The 10-day one just uses the simple smoothie formula that you make with an SP Detox Balance shake that you make. I don't want to use the word smoothie sometimes because people think of it as those fruit bombs. So it's a shake that you make, and it has the right amounts of protein in it as well. And then there's another program that's called the 21-day purification program. I do find that some people actually do better with weight loss, getting their weight loss going with the 21-day rather than just the 10-day. But again, these programs are here for you to choose from. So let me know if you have interest in that. I'm happy to tell you more about it. And finally, just intermittent fasting to cover as our last topic. Intermittent fasting is where you reduce the number of hours that you're eating in a day to 6 to 8 hours. So your first meal when you consume that, your last meal will be within 6 to 8 hours. And some people, they go all the way down to just eating one meal a day as well. Again, the key to this is that you want to be in fat burning mode to be able to pull this off. And this is a way for you to get into fat burning mode. And so eating breakfast, the way to start into this is that you want to only eat breakfast when you're actually feeling hungry. That's how you can start this kind of thing. And so in the morning, if you just automatically eat breakfast without actually even being hungry, then you're going to keep sending yourself into that carb burner mode. And then all day long, you're going to have to keep snacking and eating because you'll burn up the carbs. So if you just push that off until you actually feel hungry, and then you make sure that the meal that you break your fast with, that it's a fat and a protein rather than a carb. And then that's going to help to start to set your body so that it stays in more of a fat burning mode instead of a fat storage mode. And then once you look at what time it is that you started eating, you want to see if you can actually finish your last meal of the day, like 8 hours later. And then don't eat right before you go to bed, and then go to sleep. And then the next morning, same thing. You're just going to push it off. And then over time, you should see that you can condense that eating time down to 6 to 8 hours. I've had so many people that have been able to do this, and it may take a few weeks to kick it in. Some people even a couple of months to kick it in. But once you are in fat burning mode, you have this endless resource of energy in your body where anytime you need energy, you just burn some of the fat for that, rather than burning the carbs, running out and having to fuel yourself again with more carbs that you put into your body. Instead, when you get into fat burning mode, then you just have this endless resource. So I hope that you found that this was useful, and that you can put into practice exactly the things that you found were useful for yourselves. And again, just let us know if there's anything more that we can do to help you with. These are some resources that you may want to take a note of. The paleodiet.com, bonfirehealth.com, as I mentioned. CrossFit.com is a great way to develop healthy habits around exercising. Performancemenu.com, marksdailyapple.com, paleocookbooks.com, and paleodiet.com. And there's many more that are out there. These are just ones that I have looked at and appreciate and would like to share with you. So that is our webinar for tonight. And again, if you have any interest and you want to talk something down with me, everybody is unique, and I like to make sure that I'm very precise with how I work with people. So please do feel free to just text us 15 and 15 consult, and I'm happy to set up a time, get you onto my schedule so we can talk things down. Thank you so much for your time and attention for this evening. And we're going to finish up our webinar. And if I can stop our share, and we're going to close down the recording.